So anyway, so without more ado, I'm going to ask Emma Hogg, who is the Chief Exec of Wildworks, to kick us off with a few minutes of her reflections. Thank you very much, Emma.
Hi, morning. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about where we've been on a journey over the last 5 years in terms of a place of uncertainty that we've been managing. So we're a site-specific theatre company. We take participants and audiences on physical and emotional journeys. We make work in fan locations, not formal theatre venues, and we make it with and for the community that lives there. So we're used to working with uncertainty because we work with communities that are often in a state of change or living on the edge. We've worked in Palestine on the West Bank. We've worked in places where they've lost their major industry. We work outdoors. We're used to the uncertainty of the British weather. And for us, the usual rules of kind of formal theatre doesn't apply. So we end up making new rules in every location. So then in 2015, just under 5 years ago now, we're having a great year. We delivered a critically acclaimed show in the May, and we had loads of projects being lined up. And then our artistic director and the founding director of our company delivers us a bombshell where he sits us down and he says he's got terminal cancer. And he doesn't know quite what the timescale is. He's had a think and he's decided that his bucket list isn't anything else other than the work. And so the projects continue to line up. He also asked us specifically to not disclose much of the information to people. He didn't want to share it publicly. And so we decided that we would carry on and we would tell people as much as we needed to. Every project from then on in had a contingency plan and a contingency plan and a contingency plan, working out what we were going to do if Bill wasn't going to be there, wasn't able to carry on, or even for small periods of time. But he did. The giant that Bill Mitchell, if anybody ever met him, he just carried on. Chemo drips attached, trips and meetings in London straight out of the hospital. It wasn't easy. It was pretty mental. Emotionally, he was probably a little bit more unpredictable, but then as an artist, he was always a little bit unpredictable on projects anyway. But we continued, and it continued well. We carried on through 2016. We carried on doing a couple, we had 2 other major projects, and it felt like he was going to go on forever. 2017, January 2017, and all of a sudden we're told that actually chemo's not working and there's no more treatment. He tells me, he tells the board, and at that point he doesn't really want to tell anybody else that this is the information. For those, we're an MPO. This was the time in January 2017 where we were having to write our next 4-year plan in an MPO application. And I was having to do this in the knowledge that I didn't even know whether we had a year, whether we had 6 months, what we were going to be doing. So I was writing a 4-year plan, and I was also talking to Charlotte about how do I close a company down? How do you close a charity down? How do you go about this? And kind of had 2 different folders going on, one which had the future and one that had a future that we just didn't want to think about. So we're told Bill's going to be fine until he isn't. It was the type of cancer that he was just going to carry on, and then all of a sudden when he wasn't, it was going to be really quick. And we had a project ahead of us, so we carried on with this project in our sites. Unfortunately, he didn't quite make it. He passed away 6 weeks before that project went into delivery, but we did it anyway. For us, the next 12 months was like being in a really, really thick fog, where we didn't really know where the path was or how we were going to find our way out of it. At that point for us, there was no clear choice within the team on who could take on the artistic leadership. And the only thing we needed to do was we had one more project in 2018, which was part of the World War I centenary. And it was kind of a bookend project to the one we'd done in 2014. So for us, it was the main focus. So we carried on and we did that. And then the second half of 2018 just, for me now, feels like a bit of a blur. It was dark. it was a really challenging time. Internally as a company, we felt incredibly fragile. Relationships between the artists, between the company, with the board, it was like we were on ice, and at any point, you know, it was all going to fall away from underneath us. And then at that point, I'd been stepped in as CEO as an interim period to kind of work out how to do this. I'd started with the company as general manager, so I'd gone from general manager being asked what my 5-year plan was, which was, I just want to work with this company. I think Bill's a genius. This is all I am, you know, I've got no big ambitions to kind of carry on. I'm happy where I am. And all of a sudden thrust into this world of leading a kind of a broken, grieving company. So then we had to work out who we were, who's Wildworks, you know, who is Wildworks without Bill, and what makes a Wildworks project if Bill isn't the artist at the helm of it. And we ended up bringing in new board members. We needed to have some objectivity in our decision making, somebody that wasn't grieving. And we brought in a brilliant new chair who's really helped guide us since then. But of course, with new board members who didn't necessarily know the work as well, we started on that from a point of view of, okay, who are we? And it came back to our question of our values. We also decided to do a rebranding, update the logo. We've been looking at the website, and time again, it's made us go through that. What are the values of the company? What are the values? Who are we? And slowly and surely, we realized that they were our true anchor point, that it didn't really matter what the artistic outcome was, as long as the values of who we are and what we hold on to really tightly were kind of embedded all the way through. We also realised when we were looking back where we'd perhaps taken some wrong turns on this journey, the decisions we'd made were the ones that didn't quite chime with the values. And then then you look back and you kind of go, hindsight, we know that when we're working with strong communities, those communities might be kind of beaten down and broken, but the best projects come from communities that are really clear about who they are, and what their values are. So we were kind of like, okay, so of course the same is true for us. And so kind of letting our values guide us over the last 12 months, it feels like we've really found our path again. So at the moment, what I would, from our journey, from our point of view, if we can't predict our futures, if we can't work out what's going to happen, and we can't make firm plans, then there are things that we can be doing, and we can be reflecting on who we are and what matters. It's really interesting. I went on a coaching course where I was also asked to, and it wasn't an arts-based one, it was kind of female leadership from kind of all over, private sector, big corporations, big business. And we were asked to do exercises around individual values, the values we hold for the company we work for, and our values for the world. And I found that a really interesting exercise as to where perhaps my individual values don't sit alongside. My individual values are around partnership and working together. And it made me realise why I found being in leadership so challenging, because being solely responsible was an area that I found quite uncomfortable very early on. And I can't change that. That's the position I'm kind of in now. But it's made me kind of just recognise where the discomfort comes from. I think the other thing right now is to just, if you are in a position where you feel like you're alone, if you're running a company, it feels a little bit like you're holding the sky up for everybody else. And if that you let go for a second, then you're gonna, be the person responsible for letting it go on a load of other people. So I think it's really important to find a support system. I found mine in that group of those other women who had no idea what I was talking about when I tried to explain the work that we did. And I think the other thing is to try and keep clear and honest communication flowing in both directions between your company and your board, and be honest, but be kind with the words that you're using to be honest, and don't necessarily fan the flames of fear, but don't pretend you can put the fire out either if you don't know if you can. So we've kind of reminded ourselves that we can embrace uncertainty, and that as artists, we have an opportunity to reflect our values to the world. And I think that's a really privileged position that we're in, especially at a time when it feels pretty helpless. And I think if uncertainty creates paralysis, a fog of inaction, then there's a problem. But I think uncertainty with great action can lead to amazing things. I love the writings of Rebecca Solnit. If anybody's read I'm trying to remember the name of the book, I'll put it in the chat. But there's a quote that really resonates with me, which is, "In uncertainty lies the power to influence the future." And I've got one other image, which I will send in the chat. If images can go in chat, if not, I'll send it directly. Bill was a collagist, and in his own time as an artist, he would make scrapbooks. And there's an image from Bill in his musings about his illness and his death. And he wasn't a religious man, but he really believed that art was going to save him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. That's really brilliant. Yeah, I think there's some powerful things in that. I mean, the finding your values and helping them, getting those to kind of guide your purpose. I think for all of us at the moment, that seems to be the thing that kind of keeps us going, is recognizing what we're there for. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Kev, would you like to take over from Emma, and then we'll come back to that with people's questions?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin. I'm the finance person at ITC. I may have done some finance courses with you in the past. So my initial contribution today, it's going to be a bit textbooky, but I hope that what I'm about to say is common sense, and you're doing much of it already. So here we go. If I'm not looking at the screen, if you can see me, can people see me, Charlotte?
Yes, yeah, I can see you.
Okay. Because I did write a script, so I am reading from the script. So if I'm not looking at you, apologies. Okay, so when you're dealing with uncertainty, I believe it's important to have a firm grasp on key financial numbers, so that you can make the appropriate changes quickly. Today, with the amount of uncertainty that we're all facing, keeping tabs on your expenditures, cash flow projections, budgets, etc. This will help reduce the number of surprises that your business, your organisation may incur. So if you've been around for some time, especially since 2008, you'll understand that circumstances change and unforeseeable events occur. So whilst you can't read the future, you can make smart choices to prepare well for this. So not only will this provide the peace of mind that you're more likely to respond quickly and effectively when trouble strikes. So with that said, staying on top of uncertainty is as much about planning for failure as it is as hoping for the best. I think when Charlotte asked me to do this, she said, well, you're the one in the room that always is a bit of a, not so much a naysayer, but always makes people think of not negative things. So I think we always like to just think of positive things. So I think you are going to have to get used to planning for failure going forward. So you shouldn't be afraid of that. And it's not wrong to have this state of mind. This should free you up to make more detailed, rational, and transparent plans, especially before taking action. Most successful organizations know that they're not always going to make the right decision, but they do know how to absorb and understand mistakes. And this is especially so, this will help them to make better decisions in the future. And they never let mistakes get them down for too long. I mean, that's quite important. You will make mistakes. Don't dwell on it, just push on and use that information to make better decisions in the future. So there are a number of strategies that can help your business deal with the ever-increasing levels of uncertainty that we're facing. I definitely recommend using analytical techniques. but make sure that you're using ones, especially in smaller organizations, that don't require high levels of accuracy. If you put too much, if you're reading stuff now yourselves about uncertainty and modeling, you'll be able to read tons and tons of stuff about how you can do it. And a lot of them will be for very sophisticated businesses, but also those businesses spend so much time on past data. A lot of this stuff doesn't predict the future. Simple models, which probably don't reflect past data well, are very effective at predicting the future. So definitely don't use very sophisticated models. Simple statistical techniques are usually more reliable with dealing with uncertain situations. Okay. Secondly, you're going to have to in the future prepare for multiple outcomes. I think people will have to stop assuming that the most likely outcome will turn up at the conclusion of every situation. So, in the past, I'm usually dealing with risk when I'm budgeting and that type of thing. But uncertainty isn't risk. Risk is an outcome which can be modelled, probability of failure or success. But uncertainty, well, it is what it is. You don't put it down, or I'll say you don't put it down, but you don't know what it is. So you have to guess it, really. You have to just do lots and lots of outcomes and hope that within those outcomes you may have hit on uncertainty, I suppose. That's what I'm trying to say. So multiple outcomes is where you're going with your modelling in the future. And most successful organisations are doing this already. Because they're basically trying to force themselves or enable themselves to respond effectively in all circumstances. So the best way to prepare is to, I believe also, not just from a financial point of view, but from a company organizational point of view, the best way to prepare is to include all departments and all employees in the planning process. A lot of times I work with organizations doing budgets and financial projections, and it just seems to be the chief executive and the finance team, and where I've gone into many an organization and being faced with the task of predicting the future, and really without even knowing the business, because a lot of people think financial people can just predict the future of any business, but without the inputs of the rest of your team, all your employees, you're probably going to get a very narrow perspective on the future. So these people, your employees, all your departments will give you a fresh and unique perspectives. And these are more likely to result in critical and innovative thinking. That's what you're going to have to do now. Even though I'm a finance person, I think we're all going to have to be creative. So I'm going to have to be a creative accountant in the future with you all. Okay. Also going forward, I think that you should also focus your evaluation of activities also on the inputs, not just the outputs. So when you're assessing an initiative's success or failure, I suppose, you should consider the quality of the decisions that undertook it, that underpinned it. Okay, so don't rely solely on the actual outcome of the project, bad or good, as I said, but take into account the quality of the process that went into planning and execution. And with that said, again, be ready to respond quickly. There's no substitute for awareness, listening, and detecting events as soon as they happen. So basically, the phrase is sense and respond. Focus on sense and respond as an organization, and empower, and this is quite important, empower your staff to act quickly and decisively. Because you'd be doing all this modeling, but if you don't do anything with it, then, as I always say to people, you want to do all that work, but what are you going to do with it at the end of it? Because this is costing time and money. And if you don't make value-added decisions, then it's a waste of time. So, quickly and decisive action is what's needed as soon as you evaluate any of your initiatives, okay? I think this is financial, but basically I think people are going to have to cultivate their reputation for trust in this uncertain world, and this will help to build relationships. I'm working with a lot of companies that obviously they did beforehand, but now a lot of their budget isn't based around producing work, it's about co-producing work. And co-producing work is about sharing risk as well as success. But sharing, and I've just said risk is uncertainty, but risk is what we can have a bigger sway over. So, as I said, in the end, you have to prepare for failure, success, and everything in between. But as long as others find you trustable, I don't think you'll ever be on your own in this endeavour. So focus on doing the right thing, and your customers, co-producers, employees, and other stakeholders will have an interest in seeing your company weather whatever uncertainty might come your way. So other ways to prepare for uncertainty include staying in the now. I think a lot of companies fall into the trap of getting caught up in their own little world or bubble, but that's an important trap to avoid. One of the best ways to combat financial uncertainty is to stay abreast of economic indicators. So educate yourself on the general state of the economy, what decisions are being made at the national level, how economic forecasts might affect your company. I mean, I've said about cooperation, and I'm now going to say this can put yourself ahead of others in the game. I'm not trying to promote competitiveness here, but it's just the way it is. It's the way of the world. I mean, some people will fall by the wayside, not wishing to be negative, but that is probably going to happen. So, again, that being said, you're probably going to have to watch the news and read the financial press, no matter how painful that is to you. It's something I do. It helps me to help people to make decisions, and yet come at it from a slightly different angle sometimes. Okay. So constant review. Forward-thinking company understands the value of analysis. You should be constantly reviewing your business plan to ensure that it's current. If your business plan is still addressing the needs of your customers, clients, as they were 5 years ago, then basically it's out of date. So you're going to have to keep on top of that. And then finally, the only certainty in life is change. This is particularly true of business. I'm talking about businesses because you are businesses. So sorry about that. And you're going to have to think like businesses going forward, even if you are now. So where unpredictability has been at all-time low in the past decade, you're going to need to be properly prepared for the uncertainty in which we are all surely headed. That's me for now.
Thank you very much, Kev. That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I asked Kev to do this was because actually one of our darkest moments after the lockdown, and I was genuinely wondering what on earth we were going to do. I think I sat down with Zoe and Kev, and we did have that kind of, you know, a sort of financy kind of meeting, but it did, as you have absolutely said, Kev, range into that kind of much deeper strategic thinking. And I think that kind of the focus on the apocalypse budget helped us to kind of do some of that thinking around, you know, what are we here for? What's it all about? What's the purpose? And I think your point about trust is really important. I think you know, there are things, that little pegs that we can put in the ground at these times of uncertainty, and they all come down to our kind of qualities, actually, the quality of our thinking, the quality of our values, and having that integrity. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kev. And finally, Gareth from Little Earthquake. Gareth is our vice chair, and yeah, always cheers me up. Gareth. Oh, you're muted at the moment, Gareth. Zoe, can we unmute Gareth?
Always gets me, sorry. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah, great.
Right. So, hi everyone, it's great to be here. So I just wanted to start with a caveat really, and that is that I'm aware that all of our situations are vastly different from one another. You know, we all come from different places geographically, and we all work in different art forms and have different management structures and financial models, and ultimately we all reach different audiences. In a recent blog post for Arts Council, Darren Henley said, "The moment of need will come at different times for different organisations," and I think that's really, really true. And because I can only speak from my perspective, your mileage with what I have to say might vary. So please take what's useful and just ignore the rest. But with that in mind, I thought it might be useful just to give you a little bit of context from where I work, so you know where I'm coming from. So alongside being one of the vice chairs for ITC, I'm also 1/3 of a Birmingham-based theatre company called Little Earthquake. And as part of our wider work with Little Earthquake, we run an initiative called East Meets West, which is mainly a website and an online social hub, which increases communication and collaboration between the East Midlands and West Midlands independent theatre sectors. Last week, Little Earthquake celebrated our 15th birthday. So that was quite a milestone. And we're a non-regularly funded organisation, so we're not an NPO, but somehow we have managed to keep going for 15 years with project grants, or grants for the arts as it used to be, commissions, the support of an amazing audience base that we've built up over that time. So really, COVID-19 has put the kibosh on pretty much all of our lifelines. And we are now finding ourselves in the position where we are developing our own strategy for managing the uncertainty of the next 2 years, perhaps longer, who knows, as well as through East Meets West, working with lots of other organisations to help lots of independent artists and other organisations in the Midlands do the same. And we've started to base our personal strategy on 3 distinct guiding principles. And the first guiding principle is all about mindset. The second guiding principle is about how we can structure our approach to this crisis. And the third guiding principle is about unearthing the opportunities that we can find in these strange times. So I'll go through each of the guiding principles and I'll explain what our approach is. So I'll start with the first guiding principle, which has been really, really helpful in helping with our mental health more than anything, actually, if I'm being honest. So in those really early strange days when the kind of enormity of what was happening started to hit home, I remember we were midway through teching our next show when Boris made his vague announcements that theatre should close. And we'd been holding our nerve throughout the whole rehearsal process, not even knowing if we'd actually get to the point where we could put this show in front of audiences. And the night that Boris made that announcement, we literally had to down tools, and our set is still standing in the theatre, empty like the Mary Celeste. And I'm sure that everyone in this Zoom has a similar story about that very specific moment when they realised that this situation was now out of our control. And that, I remember that feeling totally overwhelming. And I know through East Meets West that particularly for some independent artists, the future at the moment looks kind of pointless. And there's a really useful bit of Stoic philosophy that's been around for centuries, and I think in times like this it's worth dusting it off. And it asks us to differentiate between the things that we have control over and therefore we can change, and the things that we have no control over and therefore can't change. And when things have felt really overwhelming for Little Earthquake, and you know that panic has started to set in, as it tends to do on a daily basis, it's been really good to remember that advice, that you know there is so much that none of us have any control over at the moment, and it's pointless kind of to waste our precious energy on that. And instead we need to kind of focus our energy on the things we can control. And we've found that even making a list of the things that we can control, the things that we can influence, has been such a relief. And they might only be small things, they might only be tiny things, but I've got a real passion that tiny things can be mighty, which brings me to the second guiding principle, which is about how we've structured our approach to this crisis. Charlotte knows that I'm obsessed by a phenomena called the aggregation of marginal gains. And it's a much easier thing to implement than its intimidating name suggests. So bear with me while I just explain it to you. So back in 2010, Sir David Brailsford was appointed as the new performance director for the UK's professional cycling team. And at the time, professional British cycling was a bit of an international laughingstock. But Sir David predicted that if the team changed its training philosophy, a British cyclist would win the Tour de France within 5 years. And his approach was so successful that Bradley Wiggins won it within 3 years. And all that Sir David did was look for things that the cycling team could improve by just 1%. And they started with the really obvious things. So they looked at improving the rider's nutrition just by 1%, and improving the ergonomics of the saddle just by 1%. And then they started to look beyond those obvious things into things like the best kind of massage gel that the riders would use, and they improved that by 1%. Or a really fitting one was they looked at how they could improve the way the cyclists washed their hands so they wouldn't get infected, just by 1%. And over a short time, all these tiny little changes, which seemed insignificant in themselves, started to build and build and build, and they resulted in an overall improvement that was far greater than the sum of its parts. And this is called the aggregation of marginal gains. And what's really interesting about this, and also really annoying, is that it works in reverse. So if lots of tiny little things worsen by 1%, all of those little things add up, and we can find ourselves in a terrible position that is far worse than the sum of all those tiny things put together. And when Sir David talked about this approach, loads of scientists and philosophers jumped on board, and there's been a lot of research behind the phenomena. And Little Earthquake have used it in various settings ourselves. So we've used it as a framework to work with our board in testing new approaches to tricky problems. So we have this problem, how can we improve it just by 1% and see where that takes us? At East Meets West, we asked everyone at a conference to make a 1% pledge to improve something that they could do for audiences. And actually that's had a really profound impact on the ways that regional organisations think about access provisions in their work. If you want to know more about that, speak to SJ, who's here, who's worked with an artist called Paul O'Donnell. And his 1% pledge was about access, and it's had a really profound impact on his work. We have also used it with ITC. We asked members of ITC to offer a small 1% tangible gift that they could pay forward to their own networks. Something like tweeting about somebody's work or providing a little bit of mentorship advice for a younger company. And over time, all of those tiny little things built up to this period of huge generosity for the sector, and it was lovely for a time. So the idea is that the initial action is tiny and it doesn't take much effort at all, but over time, all of those little actions, whether within a single organisation or spread across a wider community, can begin to have an impact that's far greater than the sum of its parts. And I think for the situation we're in now, we've found it so useful to look at all of those things that firstly we have control over. That's the most important thing. But then we can start to identify small 1% improvements in those things that can keep us moving forward. And those things have really provided structure to our days. It's really kept panic at bay. Emma spoke beautifully about the fog of paralysis, and I think the 1% thing is an antidote to that. It can keep moving you forward, and you know, Kev spoke beautifully about staying in the now. And again, this 1% thing is all about what's today. What is this thing? Let's forget about the big picture. Let's look in at the micro rather than the macro. And by doing those little tiny things, we might not be moving forward by very much each day, but we are still moving forward. And I think that when all this is over, I think we'll be surprised by how much we've achieved actually by following that idea. And finally, the third guiding principle we've used is about looking for opportunities within the current crisis. And around the time that coronavirus hit the UK, I was reading about the work of an American sculptor called John T. Unger. If you don't know his work, you should check it out. He creates these beautiful kind of fire sculptures. They're great. But he also writes a lot about the creative process. And he wrote something in a blog post that really struck me. He said, if you're going to work in the arts, there are 3 things you must have: time to make the work, space in which to make the work, and resources, meaning materials, tools, and of course, money. You absolutely need all 3 of these things, and you must have them simultaneously. Now, I love that because it kind of makes the whole making process sound really simple. We all know it's not, but actually when we started to think about those 3 areas, the time, the space, and the resources, and particularly when we started to think about those 3 areas in terms of the things that we could control and the tiny changes we could make in each of those areas, they've opened up a huge amount of opportunities for us to think about, particularly about how we can manage the uncertainty we find ourselves in. So, for example, we started to think about time. Now, that's something that we've all had a little bit more of since lockdown. And some of the questions we asked ourselves included, I've got a list here. Again, your mileage may vary. How can we use our time how can we use our time working for the company more efficiently? What does part-time working look like? And how do we spend the rest of our time when we're not working for the organisation? What would the impact be if we didn't produce any new work for the next 12 months? What would the opportunities be if we didn't produce any new work for the next 12 months? What could a lockdown sabbatical look like? What could we bring back to the organisation after that sabbatical? Around space, the things that we asked ourselves include, how can we make communication efficient and transparent between team members when we're not in the same office? How can we make our home as conducive to administrative and creative work as possible? What are the opportunities around meeting each other, our project partners, project participants, and our audiences in other spaces that we aren't used to? What does collaboration look like when it's only done through social media or snail mail or Spotify playlists? Around resources, the things we asked included, what new things can we make with the old stuff we already have? What is in our control to make if we have no income over the next 12 months? Who has stuff that they aren't using, but we could? Should we repurpose some of our reserves? And if so, what should we use them for? What would happen if we actually asked for resources to make new work, including money from our audiences? What resources are others using that we aren't? What resources aren't others using that we should? Now, that's just a fraction of the questions we asked. We asked literally hundreds of questions of ourselves, and none of the questions are groundbreaking. Many of them are really obvious, but most of them we had never asked ourselves before until now. And in pretty much every case, those answers have always surprised and sometimes shocked us and sometimes delighted us. But every answer gives rise to something that's within our control and that wouldn't take much to implement. And the most surprising thing is that all of the answers have started to unearth a pathway through the current uncertainty that we're going through. And I think perhaps that pathway will continue into the unexplored landscape beyond. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gareth. That was fabulous. I wonder